myself when I was getting ready to this panel discussion today on how to present. Reforms are not easy. It's a process. It takes, it requires careful planning, careful implementation, and follow-up, obviously, and working with lots of stakeholders on the issue. But for me, the starting point was to see if the reforms are for the good image for Uzbekistan, to portray some of the officials as reformists, to bring more investments, or it is more something of more sincere, of a long-term plan, or not. So for this purpose, I was thinking of how to organize my talk today. And I thought if I divide it into 5 main sections, it might be pretty useful. So first, to start something new, to reform something, you need to accept that there were some wrongs, some problems, right? So there must be some type of admission. So I'll look into that, if there was any admission. Second, I'll look at, after admission, there are always some steps that you can take immediately. You don't have to wait for years. You don't have to meet with international stakeholders to discuss it. What can be done or how it should be done. So I'll look at if Uzbekistan took immediate actions to reform the country. Third, I'll look into normative framework. Obviously, there should be some normative framework, there should be some laws and regulations adopted to regulate the situation. Fourthly, I'll look into institutional changes in Uzbekistan. And lastly, I'll look at what are the challenges, what to expect in the long run, what is missing in Uzbekistan. So coming to admission, right after the new president, took the office, previously, as Navahor mentioned, whenever there is a problem, we would go into rejectionist or apologist mode, right? We would say it is Uzbekistan, it is different, we have different mentality, it is not vast, it is more about corporate, communitarian culture, etc. This time, it is very, very straightforward, right? President, on numerous occasions, accepted that we have a problem of torture. It is now, very famous to quote him. It used to be, used among the population as well. But to say, when he referred to how law enforcement agents worked and how they detained and, led the investigation, he said, you would even imprison or convict a street pole or street light pole, in a sense that you can basically convict anyone who you want, referring to torture and unlawful practices. Now, forced labor and child labor was a big issue that was discussed on governmental level. It is still being discussed on numerous occasions. It is going on. The major international actor in this cotton campaign, Uzbekistan, is working with that to try to fix it. Now, there is no talk that the child labor was eradicated by now, right? That there's still some forms of forced labor, and I think there's still work going on, and we'll see in like a few months if it will be repeated or not. Torture, as I said, is being discussed on government level. Corruption is being discussed. There are so many articles, and actions being taken. One of the biggest issues for anyone who worked on human rights in Uzbekistan is how Uzbekistan treated conservative Muslims in Uzbekistan, right? Extremism charges were everywhere, which is 159 and 244. You would see, so many convictions under those articles, right? And those are very vague articles. You can basically imprison anyone under those articles. Government officially accepted that there were those mistakes, which is big, I think. Next one, again, anyone who worked in human rights would know the person who was in prison, especially on human rights activists, independent journalists, or conservative Muslims. If they were given 8 years of prison, their prison term would be extended for another 3 years, repeatedly, because of alleged violation of prison regulations. Government admitted that as well. They said there were wrongs and we are going to fix that. Interestingly, the president himself admitted terrible conviction rate in Uzbekistan. Yeah, from 2012 to 2016, there were 6 acquittals in Uzbekistan, which is not even 0%. Yeah, in 2017, there were, I believe, 162 acquittals, which is still pretty bad. It is 0.25% of acquittals, right? But it is far better than having 7 acquittals in 4 years. In 2018, there were 600 acquittals. So it is definitely improving. So, and the government admitted that it is another big problem. Now, reports of international organizations, it is being discussed everywhere. Local, newspapers that would be reporting what is Freedom House telling about, democracy index in Uzbekistan, about corruption index in Uzbekistan. So I'm telling this all to say that there is, open admission of the problems and there is open discussion of that. Now let's get to the point, to the issue of immediate measures. Right? So once you admit that there is a problem, let's see if the government has taken any actions to correct that. And I think Uzbekistan did pretty well. And I think the first one coming because of this constant authoritarian treatment of people, right? There is huge distrust between government and people. And I think the fact that the president opened his virtual office was incredibly important. People were just logging, getting online and filing their complaints. According to numbers, so far there have been almost 3 million complaints. Right? The government argues that prevailing majority of those issues were resolved. I don't know how accurate is that. Most maybe no. Nabahor knows it better. But I think it was very important to see that to establish some type of communication between people and the government, that the people can address the government. Obviously, I think it has side effects as well, because people were expecting more results from the government, and it is not coming, and it obviously creates frustration. And I'll be touching on that later on, that now it is time, before we were talking about, yes, it is great, let's do something. Now it is the time for the government to show some tangible results on what is being done and how efficient the measures are. Now hotlines. Every single ministry has a hotline. Prosecutor's office, Ministry of Interior, Labor Ministry have pretty good working functional hotlines. Social media, the social media accounts of Ministry of Justice on legal laws and developments has 135,000 followers, which is I think incredible. Ministry of Justice just posts one a news about legal a new law, or answers a question that someone sent. And it is being read by thousands of people at the same time. It is I think incredibly important. And this type of Telegram channels or Facebook channels are being opened and established by some other government institutions as well. And I think it's also incredibly important. We are seeing more and more that the ministers and those in leadership positions are meeting these people more and more often. You would see them. Now they are even they started press conferences. You see lots of mistakes during the press conferences. You see that it is so sloppy, and that the person is not ready, doesn't have the facts, that doesn't know how to respond. But we see that it is happening, which is also something incredibly important, I think. Getting back to immediate measures, I think child labor and with regard to child labor, they did lots of progress in the last 2 years, so I'll be not touching on that too much. Freeing prisoners of conscience. Again, these are human rights activists, independent journalists, political opposition members, conservative Muslims. They have been in prison for years with no solid, legal ground. They have been released, and this is, this has been confirmed by leading human rights organizations, which is, I think, another, good demonstration of goodwill to change the status quo. Government again admitted that there is a blacklist of conservative Muslims that they want to persecute or keep an eye on them, and there was separate presidential decree to create a commission to review the prison profiles of convicts sentenced on charges of religious extremism. Right? There is a commission that is reviewing previous convictions, seeing if there were sufficient legal and factual grounds, and then if there were not, convicts are being released as the reports claim. Obviously, working with international stakeholders is all the way in. With UN, with human rights organizations, with USC, more. Now coming to normative framework. So I started with admission of the problem, and I think government did pretty well. With regard to immediate measures that the government has taken, measures, I think those are pretty solid measures as well. With regard to normative framework, I think the most important thing that the government has been trying to focus on is on the issue of corruption. And I just lost count of how many actions and laws that the government has adopted to fight. Yeah, I think there is lots of, obviously I'm critical of too much focus on adopting new laws and regulations because they complicate the issue even further. I would rather maybe sit and think of how to make the existing laws work, because obviously there was certain legal framework, even if it's ups and downs, but they can be used and used. But in January 2017, there was law on countering corruption. Yeah, obviously the idea is, the purpose is to create a zero tolerance towards corruption, right? And then President followed up with a decree on implementation of law on countering corruption. I think it has a roadmap or steps, composed of 51 steps that the government is planning to take, and it includes adopting an elaboration of a law on procurement, right, on increasing public control over government officials. Creation of interdepartmental anti-corruption commission and steps like that. There was this might sound funny in a way, but I think it is also an interesting how the government is trying to take steps. Again, we can discuss how efficient or how timely it is, but there was presidential decree on legal consciousness and legal culture. Yeah, in an attempt to make people more, legally, educated, right? And it has also, huge roadmap to improve the street law in Uzbekistan, right? On including educational programs in schools and universities on raise awareness about corruption, about main, human rights issues. Obviously, I think that one of the biggest things that on the normative level is the adoption of the law on internal affairs, right? Law enforcement is a big problem in Uzbekistan, right? Everyone used to be afraid of police. It is still, to the extent, it's going on. But their activities were not regulated by law. Now it is regulated. At least it openly states that torture is prohibited again and again, right? The evidence admitted by torture cannot be admitted. The presidential decree on reforming criminal investigation now provides installing cameras in the interrogation rooms. Again, is it like if obviously the police wants to avoid that, there are so many ways to do it, but I think it is still a big step towards reforming the criminal investigation. Another big issue was the issue of Propiska and OVIR in Uzbekistan, right? So Uzbekistan still kept that Soviet-style permission for a person, for a citizen to leave the country. So to leave, to travel abroad, you need to go to the authorities and ask for 2-year permission. Right? The government abolished that. Now there is a 10-year travel document. And more importantly, for me as a human rights lawyer, you would see that human rights activists, members of political opposition would not be able to get that permission. As a result, if there is a seminar going on, or if there is a conference abroad on human rights or some other issues, or they need to meet with their partners abroad, they wouldn't be able to travel. And you would see that over and over again. With regard to institutional changes, there is a lot of focus on how to make, as they call it, administrative reform, right? On how to make government offices more efficient. There is lots of work going on e-government to improve the services that the government is offering for the people. Now, in that sense, I think there was good amount of focus on Ombudsman's office, right? It has been there since 1995, Parliament's Human Rights Office. But there was no work done. You wouldn't see the Ombudsman's office doing any tangible work to improve the situation, the rule of law and human rights in Uzbekistan. But in 2017 and 18, there were additional back-to-back new presidential decrees, giving more power to Ombudsman's office. Now it can Ombudsman can submit a complaint to Constitutional Court to revise the conformity of the bylaws and laws to Constitution. which is great and which was not possible before. Ombudsman now can submit a report to the Parliament, and Parliament then, after hearing that, can take actions to resolve the situation. Ombudsman claims that the prisoners can now send a letter or communication to Ombudsman's office, and that communication has to be in the office within 24 hours. I was not able to verify that, but it is at least what they are saying. One more issue that I would like to mention about the institutional changes would be on freedom of press and expression. I think bloggers are doing fantastic job in Uzbekistan. There are some bloggers with like 80,000 followers. Another blogger I know has 30,000 followers, and they discuss very pressing social, political, and economic issues, which is great. Which again helps to create this awareness and in a way pushes the population to think about the social problems. And there is no restriction on that. Some journalists say they are still very, very careful on what they write and how they do it. At least in my case, I sometimes write op-eds on the rule of law issues. Previously, I had difficulties to publish it. Now, whatever I send, pretty much, 2 or 3 major, national publications, they would go ahead and publish it. Now, after talking about admission of the problem, right, immediate measures, and then normative framework and institutional changes, now is the time to look at the implementation, right? What is missing? What is the problem? I think for me, one of the biggest issues is it is going too fast. Yeah, in 2 years, there are so many things that I'm losing track of what is happening, right? And this again shows how authoritative the entire system is. There is this a team of people who want some reforms, and they just tell, and it has to be done. In a normal, democratically functioning government, that should be pretty difficult, right? There should be questions, there would be, argument and debate about it, and that's not happening. There are too many documents. I think we need to focus on what we have already and try to start working with local and international partners on how to make those laws work. Human capital is incredibly big problem. So I hope, by my, the initial part of my presentation, I see there is, good, sincere, bona fide intent to make things different, right? To change the situation in Uzbekistan. And there were so many measures taken, but again, there's human capital problem. And I think when I say human capital, I would specifically focus on Uzbek Bar. That's that's the association of attorneys in Uzbekistan, and it is in a helpless situation. Because it has been, beaten and, I don't know, restricted and humiliated for decades. And I think what happened in January of this year is pretty telling. Uzbek Bank conducted a secret anonymous survey. Anonymous is being, attorneys conducting anonymous survey on its own is a huge problem. But they did it, and about 91% of attorneys participated. And obviously, prevailing majority claim that they have been abused, that they receive constant threats, that their procedural rights are being violated. Immediately after, prosecutor's office and Supreme Court office, right, that they issued a rebuttal, saying this is not the case. You have the laws, you have the rights by the law, and and you are claiming that this is not the case, right? And even Supreme Court's office went so far as claiming if you are an attorney and cannot defend your rights, how are you supposed to defend your client's rights? Right? Which is a valid point, but it is again goes to this of issue of if you have been beaten for decades, right? It is by default that your rights are violated, and I think Uzbek Bar was just surprised to see such a response. To my surprise, Uzbek Bar removed those findings, and that was the case initially. That they first posted the findings, and then because of their fear of pressure, that they removed it, and then they posted it again, and then prosecutor's office and Supreme Court office responded. Now they removed it again, which again shows how weak, how they lack capacity to stand by what they say. I think my time is over. Hopefully, I can address some of the questions during the Q&A session.
Thanks so much. You covered tremendous ground there. So now we switch switch countries, and we go to Professor Nargis Kasanova of Harvard University's data center.
Thank you very much. We switched countries, but we'll continue to talk about reforms now in dynamic region of Central Asia. The topic of my presentation is Can Kazakhstan's pursuit of good governance provide for its national security? And first I want to question mark. And first I want to say a couple of words about the notion of good governance. It has been championed by international organizations for quite some time. And it focuses on processes of governing, on norms and regulations. And well, Nabokov mentioned know-how. It is about, sort of, there is an idea that there is a know-how, there are principles of good governance, norms and best practices, and this sort of you take them, implement them, then you'll have a much better life. So it's quite technocratic in nature, but lately there appears more and more academic literature on governance, particularly global governance, global order, because there is a perception that this global order is sort of under pressure and getting dismantled. So now let's move to Kazakhstan and its reforms in pursuit of good governance. Basically, Kazakhstan's government has been in pursuit of good governance since almost the beginning. And these efforts have been particularly active over the last decade. And if we indicate the main milestones, we should probably mention the 1997 Kazakhstan 2030 strategy. The idea was that Kazakhstan can become a Central Asian snow leopard, following the shining example of ancient tigers. And this strategy, actually it was written with the help of Harvard faculty. So there was this sort of inspiration there. And it had seven priorities, and two priorities were an open market economy and professional state. In 2012, we adopted another strategy, Kazakhstan 2050. It was decided that the goals of strategy 2030 were mostly accomplished. Kazakhstan became an established state, and now it can aim higher. And the main objective became joining the top 30 most developed countries. And also indicated the main priorities, main goals, and these are increasing accountability, efficiency, and functionality of the state apparatus. That's one of the main goals. In 2015, President Nazarbayev announced a new program of reforms, 100 concrete steps to implement 5 institutional reforms. These institutional reforms included formation of professional state apparatus, rule of law, and transparent and accountable state. Interestingly, earlier this year, and very importantly, in January 2015, Kazakhstan signed a country program agreement with OECD, launching a 2-year country program to help bring its governance closer to the high standards of developed states. And actually this partnership, not this partnership agreement, but in general partnership with OECD started in 2008, so it's the time of the financial crisis. And since then, since this partnership agreement was signed, OECD has been producing various reports, including public governance reviews, and these are like no-nonsense quality documents, analyzing the structures, the regulation, state of affairs, and giving recommendations to the Kazakh government. And these recommendations are taken quite seriously. And just to give you examples what kind of reports they do, one review they did was on was called decentralization and multi-level governance in Kazakhstan. Another one is toward a more effective, strategic, and accountable state. So these recommendations are taken into account, and if you read official documents, you will see them mentioning OECD standards in various fields. Now there is also an OECD Kazakhstan partnership. Actually, it's OECD together with the International Transport Forum. Well, they launched last year. They launched a program enhancing connectivity in Central Asia, and this project is financed by the Kazakh government. The first stage is focusing on infrastructure and transport. So earlier this morning we were discussing about road initiatives. So it's pretty interesting partnership. So, okay, what is the motivation of these efforts? Of course, the key motivation is search for prosperity, economic growth, and there is a clear understanding that this would require better governance. Ways to reach it, well, maybe sometimes would be controversial because I see that sometimes the government is trying to create these pockets of good governance, like this Astana International Financial Center. You have the understanding that you cannot be successful fast, at the national level. But anyways, there is this clear understanding. Also, another motivation is the search for respect, international respect, and our government is quite image conscious, as you probably know, image status conscious. So that I see these as the main reasons to pursue these reforms. Now, do we see any progress? And here I would rely on the World Governance Indicators that are put together by the World Bank project. And they have 6 main criteria for assessing governance. One is voice and accountability. Another is political stability and absence of violence. Then you have government effectiveness. Then you have regulatory quality. You have rule of law, and you have control of corruption. So if you compare the indicators given to Kazakhstan in 2007 and 2017, you see that there has been some progress in government effectiveness. So if in 2007 it was minus 0.58, and actually, okay, I should mention that the scale is from minus 2.5 to plus 2.5. Yeah, so plus 2.5, that's really good governance, and minus 2.5, that's really bad. So so government effectiveness went from minus 0.58 to plus 0.001, which is not that much, but it's already an improvement. Regulatory quality went from minus 0.38 to plus 0.17. So again, you have progress. And rule of law, it's still in the minus area, but there is a little bit of improvement from 0.95 to minus 0.95 to minus 0.41. But where we have actually a regress is the criterion of voice and accountability. If in 2007 it was minus 1.16, in 2017 it became minus 1.23. Okay, and that sort of tells you something about the governance model in Kazakhstan, because basically what we see is that the government sort of believes in regulatory quality, the importance of regulatory quality, and believes less in the importance of voice and accountability. So the ideal, I would say that the ideal is to have a functional, well-to-do state without the democratization, or with postponed democratization, as we have this formula, economy first, politics later. And here we want to introduce Michael Mann's conceptualization of state power, and he talks about 2 components of state power. One is despotic power, and the other one is infrastructure. So despotic, despotic power is the power of the state to people into doing something, and infrastructural power of the state is something that is basically close to governance. It's the ability of the state to regulate, the ability of the state to carry out its policies. It seems to me that if we look at Kazakhstan's governance and state performance using this dual model, we see that the state is lacking. There is a shortage of infrastructural power, which can be compensated by the despotic power, use of despotic power. And of course, Kazakhstan is not the only example of the kind. And we see that, and that sort of that creates a problem in my view. The state tries to keep tight control over society. It distrusts the society, and we see that protest, opposition, and dissent are generally silent. So when we hear a little bit of voice of discontent and grievances, we usually see the overreaction in drastic measures coming from the side of the state. And we saw it just recently when there was a case of the house burned down in Astana, and children died because their parents were away, and that created discontent in social media and so on. And there was some small protest by women with many children who have many children, so they were complaining about this, about the lack of safety nets, and that resulted in the sacking of the entire government. So basically, you have a small disturbance, and then the state reacts, or the leadership reacts quite strongly. And we saw something similar when we had Zhanaozen uprising in 2011. We saw something similar when we had land protests across the country in 2016. These are fairly small-scale events, but they are, basically they cause this quite substantial overreaction from the government. So if we have something like Zhanaozen, but 5 times the size, what will be the reaction? And basically what I'm trying to say is that with this model, the order in the country can be relatively easily unsettled. And if the government can sometimes uses a good amount of despotic power, then that will destroy the reputation and all the achievements that Kazakhstan has brought over this period. Will be easy, will disappear. There is also the smaller problem. That I think is the biggest problem, and there is a smaller problem, and it's the problem of management of the elites. If you look at the official documents, then there's a lot about professionalism, meritocracy, and so on. But those who know the system know that the core value is actually loyalty, loyalty to the president, and officials are accountable first and foremost to the president rather than to the people. And you can see it when we have officials on trial or officials who were sacked, and they apologize to the president. They don't apologize to the people of the country. They apologize to the president. And given the importance of loyalty and the fact that it's a pretty limited group, you need to trust the people. That results in this musical chairs effect. You have the government is sacked, but then the same people are appointed just to different positions. So pretty much you have the same people, and that's probably not very good for good governance. And that leaves us with the question, this structure leaves us with the question, what's going to happen in the elite sector, how elites will behave when this our X will come, what's going to happen, because, well, as we know from history, personal loyalty can change quite fast from the government. So, well, I will leave it.
Thank you very much, Nargis. And our fourth panelist is our own host, Marlene Larwell from George Washington University, who will be showing some new research and findings about Kazakhstan's youth. She has about.
Thank you, Alex. So what I'm presenting here is the main findings of a collective work that will be published in September, a book that is called Nazarbayev Generation. I think that will be more or less the first book based almost exclusively on sociological surveys that are kind of a rare things in Central Asia globally. So we have compiled all the surveys we could find to try to extract data. It means all the big transnational surveys, Gallup, Pew, Asia Barometers, all the surveys done only for Central Asia, only for Kazakhstan, and a lot of kind of small studies made by the scholars who participated in this volume, who did small surveys among their students and any kind of group of young people they could. So it's a lot of different data. I will just present you a kind of broad overview of who is this Nazarbayev generation, their culture, their politics. So the first thing is to say that, well, all those who were born under Nazarbayev, it's already 51% of the population. 9 million people were born during a Nazarbayev presidency, so it's already half of the population. In fact, we speak about the Nazarbayev generation, but we should be using generation in plural, right? Because we have at least 2 generations already. We have the famous Generation Y, the millennials, those who are slowly getting into active life, and we have Generation Z, those who are really children and teenagers now, and who have been born in another kind of Kazakhstan, with that difference that the millennials still remember the 90s as an uneasy time. The Generation Z are really children of the 2000s. They have no personal memory of the difficult time of the 90s. 43% of them living in rural area, not only, so you see it's still a very important part of the population that is rural. And so when we try to begin looking at who are they, what do they think, when we see it's a very conformist generation, so if you are hoping for any kind of revolutionary generation, doesn't seem to be there yet, at least quite conformist in terms of their values, their will for material comfort, their will for a welfare state. We also have data on their what we call their values, so quite conservative on family, on women roles, on abortion, on homosexuality, very kind of conservative, traditional young society. Where they are quite different from the previous generation is that, and here we see a key gap between generations, is that they are more supportive of market economy. So clearly everything that is related to private sector, entrepreneurship, banking system, celebrating individual success is there, while it was not for the previous generation. So on that you can see the change. But when you look more on something political, then it's maybe more disappointed for the US audience, is that we see, and we have several surveys showing that young people are less likely to express support for democracy than previous generations, so it's going quite contrary to what is usually expected among the Western policy making community. I will come back of some of these elements of that. Of course, all this kind of data, you have to take it carefully, right? Because we don't exactly know what is a feature of the generation and what is a feature of the age. Right? Their perception and their positioning can evolve once they become older and more active in life, okay? So what you are at 15 or 20 is not necessarily what you will be thinking and doing at 40, right? So some elements will of course evolve. We have a lot of research done on How do they relate to national identity? Because that's an important question for Kazakhstan. And what we see quite interestingly is that there is a rise in ethnic identity, but also a rise in civic identity, which means that both can go together and they don't necessarily look as contradictory. It's not a binary one or the other. What is interesting is that the binary is no more between a kind of Kazakhstan for Kazakhs or Kazakhstan for Kazakhs and Russians. It's more a Kazakhstan that would be globalized and cosmopolitan, or a close Kazakhstan. And the Russian question is kind of disappearing from the equation. Those who are in favor of a kind of globalized cosmopolitan Kazakhstan are not specifically interested by Russia or kind of wanted to give some room to the Russian minority. They have just a broader conception of what Kazakhstan should be. What also is really impressive is how Kazakh language won symbolically, I think, the battle of becoming considered as a relevant language. Among young ethnic Russian, you now have a little bit more than half of them who consider that learning Kazakh is normal if you want to stay in Kazakhstan. So you can see slowly this kind of reluctance of the Russian minority toward learning Kazakh kind of slowing down the new generation. And 2/3 of school children are enrolled now in Kazakh language, in Kazakh instructed school. We see very strong, and when the Okay, when the book will be out, a lot of articles are discussing what can be the definition of Kazakhnes, and the gender identity question are very important in this kind of re-traditionalization of what can be Kazakh identity. And so, as I said at the beginning about democracy, younger generation are no more pro-Western than other age cohorts. So here also disappointment for the US policy community, and we have several surveys that show that there is no big attraction for either the US or the European model if you formulate it like that in terms of models. If you formulate it in terms of which kind of cultural product you would like to consume, then the interest for the Western culture will be higher. It's a very rich cultural ecosystem, as everywhere in the world, with social media, with YouTube being really a very important element, with its own kind of production of things for young people. Two elements here that are really important is that you really have a Kazakh-speaking information and cultural world that exists separately from the Russian-speaking, so you can really be living in almost two different realities depending if you are in the Kazakh-speaking or the Russian-speaking world. And then global culture. So we have several surveys showing what people are consuming in terms of music, cinema, and so on. And in that case, you see really a globalized culture. They are consuming Kazakh production, US, European production, Turkish, Korean, Indian production, and also Russian. But Russian production are only one element of a huge plurality of a lot of different things, which make them, these young people, different from older generation, which are mostly consuming televisual culture, and in that case it's either Kazakh or from Russian production, but you don't have all this diversity that young people are consuming. Something that is already shifting more to the political aspect is this Q generation, Q standing for the first letter of Kazakhstan in Latin, and that has been one of the big symbolic battle of part of this younger generation to celebrate what they call so modern Kazakh culture, written it like that, so dissociated from the Soviet Russian framework. This group of young kind of activists, politicians, cultural figures have been one of the driving forces behind the Latinization of the alphabet that was decided not a long time ago. What is really interesting among this group is how much they insist on Kazakh's Asian identity. And here you really see a clear reference to Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea as models that Kazakhstan could be followed. But you can see this turn toward Asia is not a turn toward China, right? China is not looked at as a model that could be followed. They are both kind of globalized and in search of kind of cultural authenticity. And culturally, they are very much, so you have a whole kind of Q-pop culture growing that is mirroring a lot of things happening in Asia. Another important element is that we see emerging new forms of activism, As I said at the beginning, it's a very depoliticized and conformist generation, so not a lot of things are happening for the moment, but still you can see some element of kind of activism emerging, not at the level as you have it in Russia among the Russian youth, but it's still kind of taking more or less slowly the same trends. You see growing kind of urban activism, discussing urban issues, especially via social media, with several opinion influencers trying to discuss what it means everyday civility in an urban context, ecology, gender issues, so all these elements are arriving. You have a hipster community in Almaty. You have also grassroots memory activism happening in the provinces about kind of rediscussing, renegotiating the Soviet legacy in Kazakh identity and all the 20th century, with this time a very critical perception of Russia. And the same way that you have what you would consider the Western style activism, you also have a kind of illiberal or conservative nationalist activism emerging very strongly, with patriotic and vigilante group trying progressively to also do their action in trying to get young people in urban and in rural location getting more kind of actives. What has been really impressive is how much the state's structure understood that they really need to find a way to enter into dialogue with these young people, and since 2014 more or less, so here the kind of geopolitical shift seems to be clearly appearing. It's all these decisions were taken mostly after 2014. We see several people in their 40s, so they are not technically millennials, they are older, but still you see this new generation slowly taking over some quite important position, both at the central administration and in the regions. And then you see a lot of different initiatives of trying to reach out to young people, to be able to produce some kind of social media content that would speak to these young people, trying to also get some of the artists that young people like, kind of interacting with politicians. It's thing that Russia and the Kremlin has been doing since years with much more success and a much more elaborated strategy, but you can see it emerging also slowly in Kazakhstan. And also since 2016, you see now new analytical talk shows produced in Kazakhstan, in Russian or in Kazakh, with the openly formulated goal of inviting Kazakhstani population to stop watching Russian talk show and their political messaging and shifting to a self-produced talk show. And what is really interesting is that even on the very official state-backed channel, the ones in Kazakhs are inviting nationalist-minded figures, something that you wouldn't have imagined even a few years ago. So you can see both a shift of Astana toward taking into account these young people because they are kind of there on the country, they need to be taken care of, and at the same time using them also in a kind of balanced game toward Russia, in saying, well, we also have our own nationalists, we need to also kind of take care of them. So some concluding remarks to kind of summarize briefly. So what we see is that there is a whole Kazakh-speaking urban world that is really now emerging, and we can more or less guess what probably will be the niches, the cultural and political niches and direction emerging. So we have these Q groups, I don't know if we can, I mean, they are defining themselves quite like that, which is modern and globalized, but not necessarily pro-Western and pro-liberal, right? So they are somewhere in a kind of other formulation of what Kazakhstan should be. They are becoming slowly political in the sense of entering some of the state administration. We have a group of pro-Western people. I think they are a minority, and they will probably stay a minority. We have kind of old-fashioned nationalists, whom I think will not have a large future and will probably either have to kind of join the Q group or will have to join those who are more promoting a kind of Islamic culture in Kazakhstan, trying to push for the Muslimization of public space and making more open reference to Islam. So you can see, at least because this one I think will disappear, but you will have more like kind of three direction potentially of identity shaping among this younger generation. with of course the rural youth, as I told you, 43%, not participating in any kind of decision making, right, as everywhere in the world. Rural youth is clearly disempowered except when they revolt, but we don't really see what they think for the moment, except that we can imagine that they will be pushing for a kind of more conservative and probably Muslim identity inside that younger generation. What is really, I think, an important conclusion to realize is that everything related to the role of the Russian minority in Kazakhstan is kind of slowly but surely on the decline for a lot of demographic and linguistic reasons. If you look at age cohort of young people, those less than 15 years, so those who are at school and teenager, ethnic Russian represents 13% of them, 1-3. Okay, 13% of them, which means that it's just a minority among many others. I mean, still, of course, symbolically important, but we are really far away from the 25, 30, 33% of ethnic Russian we had before. So slowly the question of how Kazakhstan should manage its internal Russianness is disappearing, and the real challenge, the real debates about what Kazakhstani society will be in the future will be between Kazakh ethnic groups and no more in a kind of interaction with the Russian minority. We see clearly a group of people looking toward Mongolia, South Korea, Japan as model, and another group looking toward Emirates of Malaysia, in both cases kind of globalized modern societies, one more secular, the other with a Muslim coloration, and that clearly will be an element of dissociation between this younger generation, those who want to keep something more secular, and those who want a kind of globalization with a Muslim coloration. As I often say, I don't think that the Bolashak generation that is very often mentioned here is a kind of necessarily big driver of liberalism or pro-Western positioning as we tend to interpret it. I think it's a technocratic generation, well-trained in Western model of functioning, and kind of what Nargis was discussing, kind of international financial institution style of people who knows how to work on that. I don't think that's necessarily a driving force for the Westernization of value or anything that we would call liberalism. And then the last two questions that are of course the critical one, does that mean that when this generation arrive in power that their relationship to Russia will be challenged? We don't know. I think it will depend also on how they are able to manage geopolitical loyalty toward Russia. As I often say, I don't think Russia cares about ethnic minorities or the narrative about Russia in other countries. If it feel that it has a geopolitical loyalty of Kazakhstan, I think in that case in Moscow no one really cares about what is happening domestically as long as they feel secure that Kazakhstan is on their side. So I think Kazakhstan will be quite autonomous in managing this kind of transformation. And the big kind of last question is that clearly we see a cultural pluralism arriving among this Nazarbayev generation. Will that result in political pluralism? How all these groups will be able to kind of shape their own strategies in something that would impact the political spectrum? We still don't know, but clearly compared to what we knew about the younger generation previously, we have clearly kind of different sociological constituencies emerging inside this Nazarbayev generation, and probably on one way or another it will have an impact on the way the political system will evolve in a certain amount of time. And I will stop on that. Thank you.
All right, terrific. So let's move into the Q&A portion of the discussion. Let's take a bundle of questions, and just a reminder, we are being live streamed, so you will be part of official proceedings, so make sure just to state your name and your affiliation. So, questions? Yes, let's go here first. And just wait for the microphone.
Hello, John Krabak, MA student at the Elliott School. I was wondering if Madame Immola, if you would be able to sort of expand on some of the smaller demographics within Uzbekistan and how they react to sort of the opening up. I'm thinking specifically about ethnic minorities, like the Uyghurs. Is there, both from the government and also from the local populations, is there an openness to engaging with them to work towards the future of Uzbekistan?
Great, thank you. Another question?
I was hoping to learn a little bit more about the civil discourse taking place, especially in Uzbekistan. Akmal, you mentioned that there are a number of young bloggers who are attracting tens of thousands of followers. And I'm just curious, what are they speaking about? You know, in the last 10 years that my organization and other international organizations have been working on Uzbekistan, we've been focused on the issues that you mentioned and highlighted, like child labor and politically motivated harassment and arrest. I assume this is not what they're talking about, and we've had very little access to those conversations. And so I'm just curious if you've uncovered certain topics or themes that are occupying most or much of that space.
Thank you. Maren, can you tell us who you are?
Sorry?
Can you tell us your institution?
Yes, Maren Turner. I'm the director of Freedom Now, which is a local-based organization focused on politically motivated imprisonment.
Super, thank you. And yes, we'll do one in the front. And we'll
So, for, I guess, Ms. Woodrow, I'm just assuming that I guess the culture of Kazakhstan is hostile to acceptance of the LGBT persons and equal gender equality and birth control and I guess reproductive control and abortion and things like that. Is that correct?
Okay. And can you just tell us who you are? sir?
Oh, sorry. Name is Dave Onspach, retired. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we have, I think we can take another one.
Well, thank you very much for all speakers. My question would be, my name is Bakhtiyor Safarov, Central Asia Consulting, to Marlene Laurel. Very nice presentation on Nazarbayev generation. I was wondering if something similar would be done in Tajikistan.
Okay, great. I think we have a good, I think everyone has something to answer, so why don't we start?
So, the government would tell you in Uzbekistan that they are very much engaged with the ethnic minorities, and they love all kinds of events, conferences, forums where the members of those communities are invited. But the focus is more on culture, really, rather than on political debates or on the reform agenda when they gather these minorities. I would also say that the Uyghurs are one of the most silent parts of the society in Uzbekistan, and so again, the focus is more on cultural values and common values and tolerance and peace, rather than those really intricate, sensitive political issues. I don't think Uzbekistan is there yet. You know, when you're there, what you see, I mean, I keep on thinking again and again, as critical as I am, that a lot that's happening is quite organic for the country. You know, Uzbekistan is in some kind of a therapy. It's as I said, you know, it's starting to have that really uncomfortable discussion with itself, and it can be painful in many ways, not just for the authorities, but for the ordinary citizens who are not used to really open up. And I think the society is slowly learning to listen to itself. I mean, that question about bloggers is really important because bloggers have been the ones who have been raising these sensitive issues. But bloggers are not really bloggers in our Western understanding. Bloggers are the social critics of Uzbek society. And some of them don't really have their own pages. And many of them use their Facebook pages only. And now that everybody is watching what's happening in China and regarding Uyghurs around the world, there is some discussion of the Uyghur plight, but not to an extent where the authorities are engaging in those conversations yet. Let's see what happens.
Can I just say something? Can you pull the microphone closer? It's really hard to hear in the back.
Sure.
Alex, I wish I could introduce Maren instead of you. I worked at Freedom Now. Maren was my boss. She's my mentor. I learned a ton about legal work, legal advocacy, and human rights. Thank you, Maren. Back to your question, Maren. That blogging in Uzbekistan is definitely something very new. It is key. It has been, I think, changing how the social opinion is shaped at the moment. Just if we look at, Facebook, most of them on Facebook, but I think the mobile app applications like Telegram is big. They have their own channels, they have their own names. Usually, government knows who is running those channels. And those would be short remarks about major happenings in the government, right? For example, Freedom House report comes out about democracy index, right? And they would post their thoughts, why it is good and why it is bad, or what is missing in those reports, right? Or things about corruption. Forced labor was all the time talked and discussed. One of the recent bombs, I would say, there was a remark by a journalist about the Prophet Muhammad, right? And then some of the big part of the population got it wrong. That they thought that she humiliated him, right? And they started discussing this. She shouldn't be holding any government position. She should be punished for that. Some people were even calling for retaliation, etc. And then I think this blogging community came back with strong analysis of why we need to understand what is freedom of speech, what is secularism, why a person can speak her mind or his mind. Obviously, there was then second, big, group of bloggers with more conservative views who were blogging against that, saying, we can accept your arguments about freedom of expression, that you can say anything, but if the person is in the government, she or he should be better, careful how you talk with, those, names that we all, respect. And I think this is great that this discussion at least going, because we didn't have that. And I think millions of people, not millions, but maybe at least thousands of people came out with some thought, some conclusions for themselves, right? Because this is a society that has never discussed things openly, and that is happening. And I think bloggers are moving towards that. Obviously, on the rule of law issues, there is limited impact, right? Because we don't have those bloggers who would know how to post on those. But social issues generally, that they are being discussed really, really nicely. I follow a few of them and I learn a ton from them.
Who exactly do you follow?
For example, Davletov Uz does great job. And then Eldar Asanov, he'll be fellow. I think GW is lucky to have him here. He'll be joining soon.
10
He's
days.
fantastic in blogging in Russian and Uzbek. And by the way, formally the experts who knew Russian would think that it is sufficient to follow the events in Uzbekistan. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. Especially as the recent events showed, like Russian speakers woke up like in literally 6 days after everything was discussed and agreed, and everything pieced out, and then Russian bloggers came out. Hey, by the way, this happened 6 days ago. It is in the past already. And this is understandable why Russian experts, or why Russian language was primary, because good substance was coming from, Russian bloggers, Russian-speaking Uzbeks. That's not the case anymore. There is lots of good content from, purely Uzbek bloggers in Uzbekistan.
So I think also, yep. Okay. Well, the LGBT or LGBTQ and people are having a hard time in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, including, and that has to do with the Soviet heritage, because in the Soviet Union it was considered to be perversion, wasn't definitely normal behavior, and now with the Russian propaganda and also the Islamic revival going on, so it's also it's quite hard for these communities. And our Muftiyat basically took a very conservative approach to it. So the issue, the fatwa is very tough on homosexuality. But birth control, reproductive rights, it's a different matter, because once again we have the Soviet tradition of kind of abortion was a normal thing, and reproductive rights and all these things, and that is maintained. Yeah. So these are two different, conservative in one area, not conservative in.
Yeah, if I can add on that, I think there is a difference between opinion and behavior, right? Opinions are very often very conservative on abortion, like, oh no, it's not good, it's reprehensible. But still, if you have to do it, you do it, right? So the behavior is less conservative than the opinion is in practice, and that also, I agree, the Soviet legacy. On gender role, it was interesting among young people, it's quite divided. About those who consider, like, well, men should be the men breadwinner and so on, women in the kitchen, and with the children, it's like here too, you can feel it's quite divided, and we have a lot of studies really on how these gender identity issues are really received as repressive by many young people who feel like you have to conform to a model that is forcing retraditionalization, while many of these young people would like something softer. When we look in terms of value for the young people, we see three groups, right? So rural youth is the most conservative, then Kazakh youth, and then Russian-speaking youth is the most liberal in that kind of framework of still being quite conservative globally. And on Tajikistan, so we could do probably the same book on Kyrgyzstan, because the Kyrgyz society has been also quite well studied. We have surveys and so on. We cannot do it on Tajikistan. There is no enough surveys to do this kind of study. And there is no possibility of doing a lot of surveys now in Tajikistan. Things are kind of deteriorating there in terms of research. The best study is the one that has been done by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and they did it in 4 countries, and they have something on youth people in Tajikistan, but more than what they did, I'm not sure it's doable. And so in fact the real question now is to know how could we do the same thing in Uzbekistan, because that's where, in a sense, where it's changing fast and we have almost no information at all. So everything has to kind of be building and pinning up, and that will take some time.
Terrific. Okay, let's take some more, and let's focus in this section now. So we'll go over there. The front. The gentleman. Oh, hi.
My name is Leo Zucker. I'm with the Emerging Market Forum. I'd like to ask Marlene and Nargis about how the reforms that are underway in Uzbekistan are being perceived in Kazakhstan. I have heard that given that President Mirziyoyev's reforms fall to some degree into the mold of those that have for a long time been pursued by President Nazarbayev, there are worries among Kazakh officials that Uzbekistan will steal their thunder. I'd like to know if that impression is in any way valid, and perhaps what the sense is on the ground among the general Kazakh citizenry.
Then thank you for connecting the panel.
My name is Suzanne Rothman with the International Trade Administration. So my question is about reforms in both countries and whether you all see them as a harbinger that there might be some room for more optimism among Western investors, which have historically shied away from this region because of corruption and other regulatory issues.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Helen Beckner. I am an analyst at a private company called WorldAware. I'm particularly interested in discussing, you mentioned in Uzbekistan that the people were very eager about reaching out and for reform, and especially to international actors. And my question is, which international actors are people reaching out to most, especially in the form of NGOs, perhaps donors, if it's in the nonprofit sector, and which countries? And the second part of that question is, depending on those countries, is there a need to sort of build certain foreign language capacities, especially since part of those communications will need building writing, and speaking skills to reach out to those countries. Thank you.
Ambassador Report. Over here.
Thank you, Bill Courtney from RAND. Maureen, I'd like to ask you about geopolitical implications of your study. You indicated that young people in Kazakhstan are not really seeing China as a model, of course it's now the Xinjiang Republic. And the consciousness about Russianness, if you will, about Russian issues, maybe Russian language. Up until now, Kazakhstan's national strategy has been to have productive relations with both Russia and China as a way of preserving its security. Is there a risk that as these young people come into power, that they will have less close ties with China and Russia than now, and could that increase risks to Kazakhstan's future security?
Okay, great. And I promise we'll go to the back and on this side next time. So, start up again. Yep. Yeah, should we start with, well, yeah, let's go backwards. So Marlene, why don't you start off?
Yeah, so I think it's just two different level of the discussion, right? Kind of national security direction or kind of big foreign policy strategy of Kazakhstan is to keep the balance between Russia and China, potentially Russia, China in the West. That I don't think how it can change, right? Because the geography will not change and the differential of power will not change. But then toward which kind of model young people can be interested is another question, right? I don't think the two are kind of overlapping. What could arrive is that have this younger generation kind of being more attracted in having second-rank actors becoming more involved to avoid just having this kind of triangle, Russia, China, the US, and trying to have more of South Korea, more of Singapore, more for Malaysia. But I don't think that kind of really change. It's just two different ways of expressing what Kazakhstan is, right? One is to decide if Kazakhstan wants to look at some country as a model, and what Kazakhstan has to be balanced between just to keep its own sovereignty. I don't think they ever state clearly that they wanted to see Russia or China as a model. They just have them in their foreign policy as the two main things that they should balance, but then they can look at other kind of countries as a model. And in fact, when we look at survey, so perception of Russia, China, the West as model has been declining, largely for the West, both US and Europe, still for declining for Russia, declining for China, and I think it will decline even more now given what is going on. Not rising a lot, not rising at all for Middle East, rising a little bit but not noticeable for like South Korea and Malaysia, and the only category that has been rising over 10 years is Kazakhstan should have its own model. Right? So let's just dream about kind of looking at a good model and importing it. So it's also a sign of kind of, will to just make your own combination of what you consider is needed and trying to kind of think that you can just look one side or another.
Yeah, which reminds me of the strategy 2030. I was talking about, it's like this snow leopard thing that it should combine Western elegance and Eastern wisdom. But okay, on reforms in Uzbekistan and reception in Kazakhstan, whether they are stealing our thunder, they are stealing our thunder, and you can see that this panel. but yeah, there are some concerns. Yeah, what's going to happen if Uzbekistan is dynamic and carries out reforms, and that reminds me of the 90s when the perception was that Uzbekistan will be the most successful country in Central Asia, the more populous, more homogeneous, and so on. So these kind of concerns came back, and plus we know that Uzbeks are hardworking and more disciplined and all that. So
Brilliant performance.
So, but it's good. I personally think it's quite good because I think we need to mobilize with the help of Uzbeks, Chinese, and so on. So it's kind of pull our act together a little bit. Regarding the model, if I can say a couple of words, yes. I would say Singapore is still sort of holds this place, a really good place, as a kind of primary model, but. China maybe not the model as a kind of like overall model to follow, but definitely now there is much more interest in what China is doing, in China's know-how, and like fintech, for example. China is definitely quite advanced, and there is a growing interest in the banking sector, and so on. So there is this curiosity, and how urban planning, urban management. That's also something that well, the expert community, the policymaking community, they do pay attention to green technologies. So it's not kind of model as a country, but there are models that are interesting.
So I'm yet to hear from any Uzbek who says we want to be Kazakhstan. I mean, that's the reality of the ground. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So there's this pride, there's this ego, and Uzbeks want to be unique, they want to be special, and that you'll hear from the authorities as well as from the public. But they very much want to attract the kinds of investments that have been coming to Kazakhstan, fully aware that Kazakhstan has a quite an advanced, relatively more advanced economic system. Kazakhstan is more linked to the global markets and everything else. So it was very interesting for me to watch the Senate session, annual session at the Uzbek Senate in December, where one of the senators, who also happens to be the Hakim, the mayor of Tashkent, arguing that Uzbekistan should become so attractive that no one goes to Kazakhstan to invest, and they come directly to Uzbekistan, to which a lot of people would just nod their heads and say, yeah, well, they know that they are far from that kind of a reality. Investment in Uzbekistan, I think any investor, any potential investor, any serious investor by now should know that they have to invest in Uzbekistan to be able to invest. Basically, that great human capital that everybody thought, or a lot of people thought existed, including Uzbeks themselves in the country because of the number of its population, isn't there. So now, more than ever, again, Uzbeks know that their capacity is limited, and they don't have the manpower or the skills or the expertise. So if you want to invest, then you have to go in, invest in education and training, and have that kind of a strategy. So that has to be a part of your strategy. The investments are not coming in the kinds of volumes that Uzbeks would like to see. China is still, and Turkey is emerging as a large investor too. Uzbeks have hundreds of major projects, big projects, humongous projects that has no money invested at all. So they're really eager to attract, and they're again working, their challenge is to convince everyone who's interested to invest that the changes are real and they're delivering some results. But in very honest discussions, they'll tell you that they don't really have much to show yet. In terms of the focus on international assistance and who they can really work with if you're in an international organization, the UN is expanding its activities, or their agencies across the country, and a lot depends here on to what extent any international organization is going to listen to what Uzbeks have to say. Like, what kind of assistance do they want, and to what are you capable of delivering or assisting on? So the U.S., for example, we constantly hear from the U.S. officials that they are willing to help Uzbeks in a way that they want to be helped. So they're going to listen, they say, to what Uzbeks want, in what sectors, what kind of technical assistance, for example, and then figure out here in Washington, how much they can really afford to assist and how much money is there for the region or for Uzbekistan specifically. So I think that's happening with many organizations. Many international organizations, specifically those who've been, who were kicked out a decade ago or so, are still considering whether it's time to go in or is it too early. They're doing their homework, they're doing their consulting, they're trying to find out what kind of space is there for them. But in those initial discussions with the Uzbek authorities, they're being told that if you come in, you have to support the reform agenda, and you have to help in a way that, to show that you share our development goals. So that's what they constantly hear. In terms of the focus on foreign languages, there is a lot of focus on education in English. As we speak, they are opening up residential schools and academies, and in these education centers, they want to provide education in English, which I think is going to be a huge challenge for Uzbekistan. I think it's a bit of an overpromise, because I don't think they're capable of doing that now, but I think they're doing this because they think that they can get assistance for that. So U.S. has launched English language teaching programs. So we'll see where these things go, but there is a lot of emphasis on not just in educating in English, and I'm not just talking about learning the language. They are talking about educating in those languages. There is some emphasis on learning German, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and preparing youth to go attend the schools in these countries and come back with that kind of an experience. So that's where we stand now.
I'll start with investors. Well, the primary issue for investors is how to protect the investment from anti-banks. We are talking about billions of dollars. And that's where the problem is in Uzbekistan currently, because now it shows how now short-term reforms that don't help, because we have huge problem with judiciary. It is not independent still. They're trying to make it, but it doesn't happen in one day. It is a good law school, it is good practice, and then it is belief in the rule of law and in the independence of judiciary, and then it is doing actually what is required, from your profession, from ethics, and from the rule of law. And that's not there. And I think that's the primary issue why big investors are not eager to come to Uzbekistan, right? We are still seeing, lots of Indian, Turkish, South Korean investment, because in a way they know how to work in Uzbekistan, and they have been there forever. They know how the things are. But the things are changing, and I think that's how I think I can relate to the second, the previous question about international partners. I think we need to go back to how it started in Uzbekistan after the independence, when the leading international NGOs came in and started like just these basics of education, rule of law, democracy, human rights issues, right? As lots of, for example, ABA did fantastic job for lawyers, for attorneys. That's where we need, we have lots of human capacity, but I think lawyers still don't know how to do their job now because of decades of stifling, of lack of rule of law, lack of independent judiciary, violation of procedural rights of their clients and theirs as attorneys. They need to find a way how to fight back, and I think now they have all the resources for that. I wouldn't. Well, I don't know why Uzbek Bar isn't coming out with concept notes about important reform issues, and you would see none, which is truly surprising. And there have been so many things happening on the rule of law side, right? But you wouldn't see any attorney coming up with a short op-ed saying why it is important and what are the problems. You would see bloggers writing about it, but you wouldn't see attorneys doing it, which is surprising. And that's where I think where capacity building, re-education, retraining comes in, from international partners. And I think for investors it is independent judiciary, and it's not happening any soon. To one short note on the constitutional court in Uzbekistan, right? I recently wrote a short article for a local newspaper analyzing its work from 1995 up to date. Yeah. Constitutional court issued only 32 decisions. Yeah, it's roughly 1.2 decisions a year, which is awful, and none of them is on key issue that directly relates or discusses how bylaw or law contradicts or is in conformity with the constitution. I wrote it. I said why it is. It's a problem, and that's there again. And unfortunately, the Constitutional Court hasn't changed its work. It is still very passive. I'm not seeing any work coming up. And I think that very weak Uzbek bar attorneys, and then very weak judiciary is the main force that will be holding back investors in the coming future.
And I want to interject and ask a question, speaking of investment and corruption and so forth. I don't want to let either Mirakmal or Nabahor off without commenting on the latest NTS SEC settlement on FCPA. $850 million fine, third largest in FCPA history. Gulnara Karimova named this time round. She was one of these, presidential relative A last time round. In the same time period, we see her jailing in Uzbekistan away from house arrest. Are these two parts connected? Is this part, and how is this perceived in Uzbekistan? Is there information about this? Is this contributing to the kind of de-Karimovification of the country? Give us a sense of how this is playing out in the country, what might be going on politically. Or your best guess.
No, it's Gulnara Karimova is a big problem for the Mirziyoyev regime. Let's just say that. The regime obviously wants to show to the world that it's doing something about this case. The case is still on, and that's why we keep on hearing about resentencing and moving from one facility to another. I can tell you that it's true. She was at her home for a while, and I believe now she's in a correctional facility. But I don't think we'll be informed when she's moved there. We may be informed when she's moved again somewhere else. But I also believe that it's not like she's sitting in some dark room and suffering. she's taken care of. Tatiana Karimova is still a powerful figure. Let's make that clear. And but her case emerging or re-emerging has always something to do with the discussions in the West. So it's Uzbek government's response to these cases here that, yes, we're fully aware, we're trying to provide justice, she's being punished, look at her, kind of a, I don't want to call it a show, but it's a demonstration of the fact that Uzbek government still is dealing with this issue. And I think they know that it's not going to go away. Her case is covered by the Uzbek media, but in a very carefully tailored way. So basically what the Uzbek media, including so-called independent Uzbek media, they just copy and paste what they get from the security services. So that's a story that's not going to be analyzed. Some bloggers may express their views or opinion, but it's not a part of these political debates or discussions that we see on Uzbek TV yet. That Pandora's box about the Islam Karimov era is not going to be open yet. I don't think so, because if you open that box, then you have to discuss so many other things. One issue that's being constantly pushed now is the case of former political prisoners, and many of them are out. Pretty much everyone on Human Rights Watch's list, and I've interviewed many of them. Pretty much all of them support President Mirziyoyev, and even though some of them want to be, they want their cases to be reopened, and they want to be declared not guilty, including someone like Samandar Bukhanov, who spent nearly a quarter of a century behind bars. The government is listening to their grievances, but they're not directly responding because the system isn't ready to discuss this. So I don't think the MTS case or all these other fines that the international telecom companies have been paying to the US, for example, are not really discussing. We're discussing it, and but openly in Uzbekistan, no one dares. And I think they're all waiting for President Mirziyoyev to say something about it. So once he talks about it, it may happen. But I can't see that happening anytime soon.
Just a quick
Yeah, sure.
I will not go deep into the Gulnara case or FCPA side of it, but I think that the lesson is not being learned. And the lesson there was what? You cannot abuse your government position or connections for business purposes, right? And I'm seeing that maybe there is no direct influence of that, but the Hakim or governor of Tashkent, for example, is a big business owner, right? And there is this big development called Tashkent City. And there may be no direct intention of having his business inside of it, right? But he didn't get the idea that being official, a government official, you should be very careful of which companies will be involved in that project, which companies will be kept aside, and how to organize the entire procurement process. And it was scandalous when they found out that the major construction company is registered in some type of an offshore, with, along with 300 other companies, and is under one address with no one inside. It's a project of a grand scale, right, Tashkent City. But when you look at how it is being performed, sloppiness, it's incredible. And I think that's where maybe international partners can come in and advise on how these things should be done. I think Tashkent's Hakim, he's a successful business person. I don't think he wanted to be in that position. He is there because he was appointed by the president, and he took it. But the community needs to be taught on how business interests should be balanced with the government position, and that's the least lesson should have been drawn from that.
I mean, conflict of interest is not yet a part of any discussion in Uzbekistan. A lot of people, including Hakimov, Tashkent is there because he's got his own capital. Let's face it, the regime needs people with money. The regime needs people with generous pockets, who are going to fund certain projects, who are going to at least pay for their own subordinates. So you have several people in Mirziyoyev's team who came in because they're rich, and in the eyes of President Mirziyoyev, they are capable of running these big projects. And at some point, again, we have to start a conversation about the conflict of interest. And I think it's going to happen because media will push it. We're pushing it, it's not enough. needs to really come from the inside. But I would also argue that the mayor of Tashkent is pretty much the most criticized and targeted and and beaten up politician in Uzbekistan now, and they all need training, so much training in like in simple communication in German.
All right, definitely need to. Yeah, let's go. Oh, yes, please.
My name is Amida Hashimova. I'm an analyst here. Nabahor, you mentioned Yükselish. I would be interested to hear more about that. I know Akmal Burhanov is a deputy. He's in the legislation. So, I mean, where it is, how it's connected in the leadership. Where do you see? You said we should watch for that group. Why? Why we should watch? Where do you see that group going? And then he was a part of the strategy group. I mean, is that group abolished? So I'm interested about that. Akmal, what resources do you find to analyze all these new laws or see what's happening in Uzbekistan? Why we should, is it even worth analyzing those kind of new legislation coming up while there's so much bylaws going on? And I'm sure it is, but I want to kind of see your perspective, why we should watch, why, and what resources do you use, how we sitting here in Washington DC can also kind of monitor and understand what's happening in that region. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Roxana, and I have two questions. So one of them is to Marlene. You mentioned in your presentation that there are now two, or I guess like different information worlds. You mentioned how there's one, the Kazakh-speaking information world, that is largely disassociated from the Russian-speaking one. If you can just elaborate a little bit on that, that'd be great. I'll focus more on Russia, so my questions are going to be more Russia-related. And the second question is to Nabahor. You mentioned how, there are different trainings for languages, Japanese, Korean. I'm now wondering, is there any push for learning more Russian? Considering that there are a lot of migrant laborers in Russia who always talk about how they have a harder time than other migrants because they're less likely to speak Russian. And those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Hamza Shirzada, Georgetown University. My question is more to the panelists on Kazakhstan. Over the last few years, Kazakhstan has become a bigger recipient of labor migrants from Central Asia, from Tajikistan, from Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. Did it have any effect so far on the public discourse in Kazakhstan as well as on government discourse?
Great question. Yep.
Sure, Alex Sanchez, James Defense. One question about Kazakhstan. First of all, Marlene, you talked about, well, your presentation was titled Nazarbayev's Generation. Do the surveys tell you what the Kazakh youth want Kazakhstan to be like after Nazarbayev? They say that they want a Nazarbayev type figure, or they would like elections that comes from a 180-degree turn to Kazakh politics. What do the surveys tell you about the Kazakh youth? Thank you.
Great, because this can be the last round. Let's no more here. Yes.
Thank you to the panel. My name is Zach Whitman. I'm an analyst at Eurasia Group, a political risk consultancy. And my question is, what lessons do you think Kazakhstan has learned from Uzbekistan's transition, and what lessons do you think Kazakhstan should learn?
Perfect. Another interactive question. Okay, so by my accounts, everyone gets 2 minutes to tackle all of those really important issues. So let's start again with the Kazakh side, and we'll come through to the Uzbek side. Yeah.
Okay. So on the question, do we have surveys on what young people would like to see after Nazarbayev? No, because you never ask the question like that in a survey, otherwise you don't do it. So no, when we ask them what they think about the system now, they say they are happy with it. They like this kind of paternalistic regime centered on stability and prosperity. That's what they care. The more for, then the question is never asked what after and how do you want it. But I don't think that if you ask young people, like, do you care about election, free and fair election, and kind of multi-party, that's not the problem. Okay, the problem is that are we sure we keep stability once Nazarbayev leave, and are we sure we keep prosperity, or we improve prosperity, and what can be better, and how to get prosperity without losing the welfare state, and so on. So it's more about social economic issue than about a kind of normative definition of democracy. So I think even if we could ask the question, I'm not sure we would have a lot of relevant answers. On the difference between the two information world, well, the Kazakh-speaking world is more kind of inward looking with a lot of discussion on history, national identity, rural issues, migration to cities, kind of folk popular history, more critical toward Russia, more discussing the issue of language, the issue of Soviet repression on Kazakh history. It's very often of lower quality because it's the people, the Kazakh speaker kind of journalists or bloggers are usually not trained the same way as the Russians, so it's more kind of yellow press style. The Russian information world is both more globalized and more turned toward Russia, so they can still be criticizing Russia, but still be part of some discussion that are going on now in Russia, but also more kind of westernized, right? So that's one of these interesting differences, that if you belong to the Russian-speaking world, in a sense, you are more connected to a Western world than if you are inside the Kazakh-speaking world, which is just a very close on itself. And that will be one of the challenge. And this new generation is trying to change that and to explain that, well, you can say things in Kazakh and still be globalized and not only looking at, like your small internal to the nation questions.
Okay, on this question after Nazarbayev, it's definitely a scary question. We left to adults. But okay, on the lessons of Uzbekistan for Uzbekistan's transition, that triggered another. Okay, lessons for whom? Because we don't know, right? What's the thinking up there? But in public, definitely that triggered another round of discussions. What's going to happen, the transition, and all that. And there are no clear answers. And we've been living with this question for quite some time. It's a very old question. We're preparing, and there's all kinds of amendments for the constitution. And it seems everything is in place, everything is ready. But when this decision will be made, nobody knows. Maybe it hasn't been made, the decision. So on the discourses on labor migrants from Central Asia, well, I'm not an expert, but it seems to me it's not a big topic. It's quite specialized niche topic for discussions. So you do have roundtables on labor migration in general, but it's not like it's a big concern. My sense is that there are of course violations of human rights, and especially with children, like children of migrants. That's also an issue. Providing them with education, healthcare, and all that. But in general, it's not like an issue, like political issue, like in Russia, for example. And that's it. Oh, on social, if I can add on this thing about the welfare state, that's a big thing. And if you look at the policies in Eurasia in general, it seems that there is a movement in this direction. If you look at Putin's programs, they're very much about social issues. In Kazakhstan, that's raised by Nazarbayev much more now than it used to be. So it's becoming a big trend because it is a problem.
About how to follow what is happening in Uzbekistan. There are so many resources. Let me get very specific. I'm now in my Telegram channel. Yeah, it is called Legal Info. This channel is run by the Ministry of Justice. The description says a channel providing quick information on new legal acts and reforms in Uzbekistan. Right? I go to March 12th. It says it has a decree in English. Says the decree of president on the systemization of measures to improve the position of the Republic of Uzbekistan in international ratings. Yeah, so they're trying to improve that. There's a presidential decree. This is from March 12th. I didn't go further up, right? I'm just a few days, high. Now I come down slightly. Let me see what we have. I saw something very interesting here as well. One sec. And this one is on Miranda rights. Yeah, it says, requirement that the police tell a person who is arrested or question their constitutional rights and blah, 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 right? And this is from March 14. This is all in English. There was something else here that was very interesting, but I'm not seeing it. Regulation on licensing procedures for auditing activities. It is all in or in English. The same one in Uzbek is followed by 130,000 followers, which is great. Your point about the conflict between bylaws and laws is huge in Uzbekistan, and I've been writing about it a lot. And I think government is trying to tackle that. They are finally discussing that on how to do it. The problem is there. I don't know the answer for that. They just need to, and that's where again the judiciary needs to study. The judiciary, the regular courts, right, and constitutional courts, saying that specific bylaws are against the constitutional provisions, and that's where the true separation of powers kicks in, right? And for that it will take time, and because most of the bylaws are by the president. For a constitutional court come and say, hey, what you just issued is against the constitution is a big deal. It will come this time, but it is a huge problem. I completely agree with you on that.
I just wanted to add quickly on what to learn from Uzbekistan. I think Uzbeks should learn from themselves. I think every day should be a lesson, tackling any challenge that come. I think the challenge is very clear, right? I mean, President Mirziyoyev is overwhelmingly popular. I would argue that he has enough political and social capital to lead the country to any direction he wants now. So my question to him would be, do you want to be a strong man? Do you want to be known as the strong man and rule the country for as long as you can, just like the previous leader did, and turn it into or keep it authoritarian? Or do you want to be known as someone who builds strong institutions for Uzbekistan? And I think that's a major test for him, and I think we should really talk more about that. So, and then only I think we can talk about whether Uzbekistan can stand out as an example of anything. I think it's too early to judge. Yükselish, think of it as a gateway to Uzbekistan. If you're an outsider, whether you're an Uzbek immigrant or an international organization or anyone who is interested in doing anything with Uzbekistan or in Uzbekistan, you want to go through them because they will tell you that they are the authority on any kind of data in Uzbekistan. They have the best experts studying the reform process. They will tell you what is needed, and they are the ones who are going to put you in touch with the relevant party, with the relevant side of the Uzbek government or relevant grassroots efforts or anything inside the country that you may help with or you can work with. So that's their power, basically. So Akmal Burhanov is a lawmaker. He's from Namangan region. As I said, educated in Japan, trained as a lawyer. He was appointed as the executive director of the Development Strategy Center, which is essentially the initial institution that the government set up as a non-governmental institution to monitor the reform process and to provide accurate reports about that process. So now that has turned into a bigger umbrella organization. So Development Strategy Center is still there, but on top of it sits the Yükselish National Movement, which is opening up its branches all over the country, and they're increasing their grassroots efforts and trying to do a gazillion things at the same time. So just like anything else, they're, any other agenda, they're incredibly ambitious, over-promising in many ways, and when you talk to them, they'll tell you, oh, we need expertise, we need training, we need assistance. That's like the mantra, in the country. So I would watch them. I watch them because I get a lot of information from them, and I also like them because I can get any answers to any of my questions from them. Their infographics are quite compelling. They're active on social media, but they don't always provide it in a more attractive or interesting way. So I know that they're working on that and looking for Uzbek experts who can help them with that, and especially from those abroad. Learning Russian, knowing Russian is still a requirement and a necessity. Many government jobs or any job in Uzbekistan requires knowing Russian. They welcome it, including media. I know many people take private lessons now. They want to improve their Russian. The Russian is taught more than it was, let's say, 2 years ago. So more emphasis, bigger Russian language sections at the university level. So there is some focus, but it's not as, let's say, the conversation is more about learning English, learning German, French, Korean, and Chinese rather than Russian. Because Russian is still quite a working language.
So thank you for those great questions. Thank you to the panelists for covering so much ground. And we all take a well-earned coffee break until 3:30. We'll have our concluding panel.
We apologize for the weather inside the room, but we cannot control the air conditioning, but you have coffee, tea, and cookies outside. Good.